The Orbital Guard's Origin Story, Episode 19, The Shinkansen. As promised, after meeting with several more black and white dressed colleagues, I did have an opportunity to visit the Panda Bay. There were over 20 of us that had gathered at a prearranged time, and within moments, Coden arrived with two other frogs. From there, we were escorted a short distance towards a very nondescript, very ordinary looking gunmetal door that was about 8 feet high and about 4 feet wide. It had a shiny silver hand imprint about chest level, just off center on the right side of it. One of the frogs placed their hand on the imprint, and without making a sound, the door began sliding open vertically. It was obviously a biometric sensor, and our group proceeded to shuffle ahead and file through. This door led to what seemed like a large automotive paint shop. It was bulbous and curved. It felt like being in the interior of an egg, and it was extremely bright, with no hint of any shadows. As I walked through the doorway, I felt a slight tinge of vertigo. There was more than enough room for all of us within the enclosure, but I had no idea how large it actually was. It was impossible to tell. There was no frame of reference at all. It felt like stepping into a dream sequence of an old TV show I remembered as a child. By this point, nobody even Kobe flinched over the unknown light sources, or the fact that there seemed to be no sharp edges to be found anywhere. Once everyone had made their way through the door, it began to close from the top down. This time, the color matched the interior of the environment that we were in, and once it closed, it was completely concealed, as if it had just vanished. There was no indication whatsoever that a door had ever been there. For what seemed like a few minutes, we simply waited in place without instruction. It was as if the frogs were allowing us to take in the gravity of the situation. I'm sure everyone had their own reflective thoughts during this time. Personally, I was mesmerized by the colors. The desert green uniforms of the frogs now had an added punch, and the unique percentages of my colleagues' white and black attire gave them a very blended or fused appearance within the surroundings. In short order, the frogs assembled in a specific location, and a teal green outline appeared within the same specifications of the doorway we had originally entered. Soon after it appeared, the outline began flashing, quickly at first, and then slowly until it became solid again. The outline remained solid for only a few moments and then turned orange. It was at this moment I realized that we had been in motion the entire time. That initial feeling of vertigo I had now made a bit more sense. We were definitely being shuffled within the facility. But without any sense of motion, the route that we were taking was impossible to comprehend. The orange outline soon began flashing at a constant rate and remained flashing for at least 30 seconds, perhaps a bit more, and then it turned red. As this was happening, the frogs used hand signals indicating we needed to form a straight line directly in front of this new stimulus. We did this expeditiously, and each of us, I'm sure, began to feel their own unique wave of excitement, or at the very least, more than a few goosebumps. There was a collective recognition amongst us that we were about to move from trekking in Peru to witnessing the Nazca lines being created. As we all stood at rest, eyes front and consumed with anticipation, the red outline returned to teal green, and the interior space of this new doorway outline went from an opaque mist to a translucent material, a highly advanced smart glass. This exit doorway also had its own handprint visible, except now we all used this biosensor as we exited. The train platform was directly in front of us, and we transitioned to the platform one by one. The frogs remained on board. As I walked into the bay, I had a very familiar feeling. I had had a glimpse of this level previously, but now I was entering from the opposite side, and right in front of me was the Shinkansen. It was a magnetic levitating bullet train, a maglev. And this is where things got really interesting. As we approached the train, a group of frogs motioned us forward as we maintained our single file orientation and paused approximately 10 feet from the already opened doors. Right in front of the doors, there was a purple rectangle on the floor that we all had to walk on as we embarked. The maglev had virtually no sound to it at all. It was extremely quiet. If you listened closely, it kind of sounded like walking past a refrigerator, a sound that almost any person would easily miss unless you knew exactly what to listen for. The frogs identified us by name and gave each of us brief instructions as we proceeded to board. In my case, the frog said, "As you enter the rectangle, you're going to begin seeing things within your field of vision. Follow the instructions without deviation. They will be simple and intuitive. Just relax." With that in mind, I nodded and thanked her. She motioned with her right arm that it was good to go, and I stepped forward onto the rectangle. As soon as I did, a yellow directional arrow appeared pointing forward as if it was an overlay into my new world. Just as I was about to step onto the train, the yellow arrow began pointing left, and as I followed this instruction, it quickly transitioned to straight ahead and began dissolving from top to bottom, indicating my direction of travel. The center aisle of this train was quite wide, and there was lots of room to spare. There were two seats on each side, and they were enormous. They looked like massage chairs, and that's when it hit me. The yellow directional arrow was moving perfectly within my peripheral vision, regardless of my head or neck orientation. As I moved through the first carriage, I noticed people in front of me taking their seats, and I wonder if they had all had received the same instructions before boarding. Clearly, there was assigned seating, but I let this thought fade as I tried to take in as much as possible without directly staring at anyone. The train did not have any windows, and the interior seemed overly minimalistic. The flooring was a light gray, as were the seats, and there didn't appear to be any stowage compartments of any kind. There were no tray tables, electrical plugs, or creature comforts of any distinction. It was very utilitarian, albeit futuristic. It had a slight cyberpunk vibe to it. As I followed the yellow directional arrow and made my way through another carriage, I noticed a set of two seats ahead of me on my right became outlined with a thick yellow box. As I got even closer, a very small yellow arrow pointed to one seat in particular, and that individual seat appeared with its very own yellow outline. Within about 5 rows, the yellow directional arrow began curving to that location. It was effortless and unmistakable. As soon as I sat down, I marveled at how luxurious and comfortable the seat was. It was like sitting in a cloud, like someone had designed a massage chair just for me, using some form of a heated aerogel. With the directional arrows gone, I had just a few moments to ponder the situation. As I let my mind wander, I tried to wrap my brain around this new invasive but supportive technology. Just as I melted into deeper thought, the cabin interior briefly became a light blue before returning to normal, and I was able to identify a slight hissing sound. In the bottom left corner of my vision, there appeared two clocks, and in the top right corner of my eye, there was a speedometer. The first clock read UTC, or Coordinated Universal Time, and below that, there was a clock that showed LTC, or Coordinated Lunar Time. This was my first encounter with LTC usage, and it certainly set the tone for the environment that we had entered. I also noticed that the speedometer was climbing through 100 miles per hour, even though there was no sense of motion at all. As the speedometer rose, the yellow directional arrow reappeared pointing to my right. The interior of the train had become translucent where I was seated, and I was able to view the gigantic modules for the first time. It literally took my breath away. The speedometer was now climbing through 600 kilometers an hour, and yellow perimeter boxes highlighted key sections of each module's design and construction. It was then I realized I was receiving a very personal briefing. This was my need to know, and other passengers were probably being shown different stages, different components, and information. The train speed maxed out at 888 miles per hour before beginning its deceleration. The entire trip lasted just over 2.5 minutes in total. As the train came to a full stop, I realized this undersea bay must be well over 18 miles long. We had traveled almost 30 kilometers. Whatever this vessel was intended to be, its construction was far too big to be launched discreetly topside. Whoever designed the cove infrastructure had the entire solar system in mind, and perhaps they were thinking well beyond that.